All right, welcome everybody. We're here both in person and on Zoom. So my name is Brittany Gorgas and I am the coordinator for the Crow Wing County Master Gardener Volunteer Program. And I'm excited to have Nigel Pennington-Flax here today. Nigel is from the Crow Wing Soil and Water Conservation District, and he is a Conservation Corps of Minnesota and Iowa intern. He's been here for the summer. It sounds like it's been really busy. And he's going to share some invasive plants that he has seen in the field that are common to this area and how to deal with them. So take it away, Nigel.
Great, thank you. So,
I've been turning down with that.
present.
Would it be better if we shut them off? What did you say, Christine?
Well, the front one kind of bleeds the front screen.
Okay. We're gonna, his screen wasn't advancing, so we're gonna get that going again. Share screen, the big green one. Let's see. I might have, maybe I'll get it in presentation mode right now. Oh, but they can't see me on Zoom. I need to share that. Okay, and then
All right. Can everyone on Zoom see that?
is that better? Or still a little? Okay, there we go.
All right, excellent. Hi, I'm Nigel. I'm currently serving with the Conservation Corps of Minnesota and Iowa at the Crow Wing County Soil and Water Conservation District. So this summer I've been outside a lot and I've seen a lot of plants and a lot of the invasives that are in our county and all across Minnesota. So I'm going to be talking about the ones that I see most often so that people can know what they are, know how to remove them, and know which ones you should not touch and get an expert to remove. So first, what makes a species invasive? So invasive species is one that is both non-native and causes economic or environmental harm. It threatens our natural resources and can spread very quickly. So there are a lot of plants that are non-native, but due to how they grow and what pests eat them, they aren't invasive because they don't spread all over and they aren't a threat to economic or environmental harm. And a lot of those are seen as weeds, and you can remove them or you can keep them, but they don't pose a large threat to the environment as a whole. So invasive species are bad for our environment because a lot of them take over very quickly. So because they're not from the United States or Minnesota, they don't have natural predators like insects that eat them and keep them down, and they can often find ways to outcompete the native plants. During the summer, I've done a lot of shoreline projects, so a lot of these invasive plants have shallower roots, which causes a lot more erosion problems than a native plant would. So at the Soil and Water Conservation District, we do a lot to get people native plants with deeper roots to help protect the shorelines and our lakes. They also have less food for native insects. So these insects only know how to eat the native plants. So they don't have the food to eat when the invasives take over, which then makes less food for the birds and less food for all the animals in our ecosystem. An important term I'm going to be saying a lot is rhizomatous, which just means that the plant spreads mainly through its roots instead of through seeds and such. So the first and probably the most common invasive I've seen this summer is reed canary grass. So it's one of the most common invasive species in Minnesota, and it pops up everywhere, along shorelines, in gardens, in yards, along roadsides. One of the reasons we see it a lot and we want to target it is because it has very shallow roots. So you might see like an area, it looks very grown and it looks good, but if it's already canary grass, it isn't that good for the environment. It's also very difficult to get rid of because it spreads and grows really quickly and it creates a lot of seeds. Usually when we see it, We recommend that people cut off the seed heads before they become able to spread their seeds, so you can prevent the spread of it at least. And you can do mechanical ways to remove it, like pulling, which does good for a time, but usually if you have it, you have a lot of it, so it would take a lot of time. You can also mow it to prevent the seed spread, which is good. So usually for reed canary grass, we recommend water-safe herbicides, which you can find on the DNR, the Minnesota DNR website, to find the exact kind that's good for it.
What is the seed that look like?
It's hard to describe, but it's like the normal, it looks like a grass one where it like comes at the top and has like the fuzzy kind of. And to tell that it's reed canary grass, it has a ligule where the leaf blade attaches to the stem, which is like a thin membrane. So that's the easiest way to tell it apart, because grasses are very difficult to tell apart. I've been doing this for a summer and I still find it very difficult.
Nigel, there is a question too, if you have to talk about where the plants originate or no?
Oh, no, I didn't prepare for that, but most of these, a lot of invasives originated in two ways. Either if they came in importing some grain or some seeds that aren't invasive and they just spoiled the seed mix, or people brought them in as ornamental plants and then they took very well to the United States and began taking over. Next is crown vetch. So it's been really common this year as compared to previous years because of how rainy it's been. In a lot of the projects we've done in sites we visited, there's been a ton of crown vetch. You can tell it's crown vetch because of the purple leaves it has or the purple flowers it has and its leaves. It spreads very quickly through its roots, so it's very hard to get rid of. And once you see it, you probably have a lot of it already. Hand pulling isn't too effective because of how it spreads, and it's important to make sure it's entirely removed. For plants like crown vetch, if you remove it and there's still bits of root in the ground, it'll grow back. It tends to crowd out the better species you may have in a garden or any area too. Especially with shorelines, it's bad because it tends to hide bad erosion spots, because you see it and you see a part of a shore where it's all covered and you think it might be good because there's a lot of plant there, but it does not have deep roots, so it has a lot of erosion problems.
How tall does it get?
It does not get tall. It probably gets about an inch or two off the ground, so it forms more of like a cover over the ground instead of rising on it. Next is buckthorn. So this is one of the most common invasive tree species. We have a lot of projects going on in Crow Wing County trying to remove it. It's a very large problem because of how it spreads. So it tends to be the most common food available for birds in the winter, and the berries act as laxatives, so the birds do not digest the seeds at all after they eat them, so they spread it everywhere. It also grows really dense, so if a buckthorn infestation establishes, it will take over any wooded area or open area, and it grows almost everywhere. Removing it takes a long-term plan. Usually you have to cut and spray the stumps, and that takes a long time and it takes multiple attempts to fully get rid of it. But in a lot of our projects, even after just doing it this year where we cut and sprayed, or we contacted people with a contractor to do that, it already looks much better than before we did anything to it. A lot of people use treatments with goats where the goats go in and eat all the berries, which is good for preventing it from spreading it more. But you'd still need the cut and spray treatment afterwards to get rid of it. And soil and water conservation districts are also a very good resource if you have any of these invasive species in large numbers and you want help coming up with a plan to replace them with good native species. All right, next is Canada thistle. This is a very invasive plant and it's a big challenge in a lot of the restoration projects we do. So it has this signature look with like the spiny flower and like the purple on top. And it's found a lot in disturbed habitats, which are ones where human development has come in and torn up a lot of stuff up. It's rhizomatous and it's constantly sending out new shoots. So it spreads very quickly without you even noticing or seeing any of the seeds. Mowing is an effective way to control Canada thistle, especially because of the way it grows. And if you do it before you could see it seeding, that also helps a lot. Next is garlic mustard. So in the photo, you can see how fast it grows and takes over the understory of forested areas and yards too. It spreads through seeds. So if you can clip off the seed heads or or mow it to make sure it doesn't go to seed, that's an effective way of preventing it from spreading. It also works best for mechanical removal. You can pull it out and make sure that or you can cut the flowering stem too. Herbicides work well for this one. Herbicides will work well for most of these plants. Usually we try to avoid herbicides to make sure they don't leach onto other plants for when we do stuff like this, but they are an effective way to remove invasive species. And for all of these, you can find what the DNR recommends on their website. This is also an example of an allelopathic plant, which is a type of species that produces chemicals that stop other plants from growing in the same area. A lot of invasive species have this quality, and it gives them a major leg up over native species and makes it hard for the native species to outcompete and return without human intervention.
Does it smell like garlic or mustard?
Oh, I don't know. I've never smelled it, but it might smell more like the mustard on the leaves, but I'm not sure. Next is leafy spurge. This is one of the first where you should take precautions if you see it in your yard or garden, because the sap, when you would break it, is toxic to humans. So if you see it, make sure that if you go to remove it, you're wearing gloves, long sleeves, and everything. So the seeds can travel really far with this plant. They can travel up to 20 feet. So they spread really fast and they form dense thickets like you see in the photo. It also spreads through its rhizomes in the ground, so it spreads really fast. It's important to cut or mow it if you can, if you have a big infestation like this, so you can make sure that the seeds don't grow, and instead of spending its energy on extending its root system, it spends that energy on growing back up. Herbicides are an effective treatment, and if you have something big like this, you should probably see if you can find a professional to take care of it. But if you have a little in a yard, just make sure to stay completely covered. They're also now using leafy spurge beetles as a biological control. This takes a longer time, and they specifically target the root systems of these plants. So there are a lot of cool ways to take care of invasive species now, like through the bugs and through goats, that don't require as heavy of a herbicide usage.
Do they introduce bugs, do they use the bugs, do they cause any problems?
Not that I haven't seen too much of the problems they cause. They target specifically the leafy spurge and other plants in that family. So it's recommended. It's like approved for use in Minnesota. So yeah. Next is orange hawkweed. This one, it does have a very pretty flower, but it has the signature like bright orange, which it looks really good, but it's not good for the environment. It also colonizes places very quickly, like roadsides and abandoned fields. All of these plants that colonize quickly heavily reduce the plant diversity of an area, which makes it harder for better bug diversity, especially with invasives. In their first year, they form mats of rosettes near the ground. And this is one of the plants that's more of a biennial, where in the first year, it doesn't grow the tall stem with the flower, but the second year it does. Mowing and doesn't work too well for this plant, and you have to be very precise for the mechanical control where you remove all the stems and all the roots. We have some native hawkweeds in Minnesota, and to tell the difference, the non-native ones have branched stems and their upper stems are hairy. So there's also an invasive species of clover. So this one is different than the common clover you see in your yard, which typically has the white or purple flower. Those are both good. These sweet clover have white or yellow flowers, and instead of forming the more sphere or round flowers, they have more of the stem going up of the flowers. They grow very dense and also very tall, so they overtop the native plants and take up all the sunlight. They can grow up to 6 feet tall, even. So for these, mechanical control is effective, where if you can stop the flowers from coming up, you can stop them from going to seed. If these form like a huge infestation, a burn can work well, but that can also hurt native plants in the area. And if you do use a herbicide, if you have a lot of this type of sweet clover, it's best to do it before the native vegetation comes up. Next is common tansy. So there's a lot of this in Crow Wing County, especially when we're driving along streams. We see a lot of it. It forms dense covers and tends to outcompete native plants, which we could see easily because of how tall it gets. It also makes it different for trees to establish. You should wear gloves when handling it because because it's one of the plants that can be toxic or cause irritation to the skin. You should make sure to remove the entire root and do not mow if the plant has seeds. This is for like a lot of these. If you mow a plant when it's come to seed, you'll tend to just spread the seed everywhere. So that's not a good way to get rid of invasives if they've gone to seed. You can also use a foliar spray or herbicides, which are effective. One of the main non-native bushes in Minnesota are non-native knotweeds. They spread very quickly and form dense thickets, and they grow really tall. The non-native ones tend to have white flowers arranged in spikes, and so that's one way to tell them apart from the native ones. And they also have hollow stems. So if they're still small, you can use a shovel or hand pull them, but it's a lot more difficult once they're fully grown. They also die back to the ground in winter, so that can also be a good time to dig them up out of the ground and try to get rid of them. And then for some of these larger plants, you have to make sure to dispose of them properly and make sure where you're disposing them can accept the noxious weeds. And you can see which invasives are categorized this way on the DNR website too. The other major type of non-native bushes are honeysuckles. So unlike the native honeysuckles, these have hollow stems and they all have untoothed leaves. So if you were looking at a leaf, that would mean some leaves have smooth edges while some have like little points on the side. So an untoothed leaf would be smooth. It spreads out a lot through its sprouting and seeds, and they shade out a lot of the ground cover and native plants. They also deplete the soil moisture of the ground, which makes it difficult for other native plants to establish. If you see one coming up, You can pull it out of the ground, which is effective. And like buckthorn, you can use the cut stump treatments where you cut the bush to the ground and then you spray it with herbicide. Or you can use the foliar spray, which you spray on leaves. These are some of the harmful invasives, which cause rashes and skin irritation and are very harmful to humans and animals. So in the top photo shows wild parsnip. The sap, if you get it on you, it causes rashes and blisters, especially when exposed to the sun. So you'll want to be completely covered and wear gloves if you deal with it. It can be found in most environments, almost anywhere, and it can spread rapidly once it's present. So if you see some in your yard, you'll want to take care of it pretty quickly. On the bottom, there are Grecian foxglove. So these are also toxic to humans. Direct contact, you'll absorb the toxins through your skin. So if you're removing it, you'll want to wear gloves, long sleeves, everything. It produces a lot of seeds, so it spreads very quickly, and it only has one flowering stem. So if you go in to cut it down and you cut the one stem, that's the only one for the plant. Mowing also can work for these, as do herbicides. And to tell it apart from other foxgloves, it has woolly hairs on the stems, and it has oblong leaves, and it has creamy white flowers clustered along it. It also grows pretty tall, up to like 2 to 5 feet. Next are Queen Anne's lace and poison hemlock. It's easy to confuse these two plants, but they're both dangerous to humans. So if you see one that looks like either of them, you can easily know not to touch it. Queen Anne's lace often takes over roadsides and other areas like that, but usually only when they're initially disturbed because native grasses and other herbaceous plants can outcompete it. So if you see it coming up, you can, if you try to get rid of it through cutting, mowing, or hand pulling it, or through getting some herbicides, and you plant in native plants afterwards, there's a good chance that that will be good enough and you won't have to come back and do a big treatment again. For poison hemlock, that plant has the purple spotted stems you can see in the photo, and the photo of its flowers on the bottom. You can see how similar they look as they both have the white flowers that stem out. So for both of these, you should definitely wear protective clothing, and poison hemlock is also extremely poisonous. So if you have any pets, it can be dangerous to them if they try to eat it or anything. So you can get rid of it on your own if you try and cut the taproot, but for poison hemlock, it's probably better to call a professional to deal with it. So if you see it, you know not to touch it and not to do anything with it. So it's important to pay attention to what you plant and to clean footwear and gear after recreating anywhere, or if you have it on your property, to make sure you clean off all footwear and gear before you go anywhere, and to make sure to dispose of any invasives properly. So those are the most common ones that I've seen in Crow Wing County, especially during this summer. There are a lot more invasive species that are uncommon that show up in Minnesota, but those are the most important ones I think that you should see, that you will see in your garden and that you should take care to remove, and the ones that are harmful to people and you should take extra precaution with. Thank you.
Nigel, any
Thank you.
questions?
Yeah, any questions?
Where can you dispose of the invasive species?
So for a lot of them, or for some of them, I'm pretty sure you can do it in, there are disposal sites in the county. So I think if you can take them to a landfill or contractors who have special composting things. I know on the DNR's website, they have a list of places to find one close. Yes.
The questions about question on one that I have concerns about, what do you know about creeping Charlie?
Oh, yes, that one's interesting because it's not actually, I'm pretty sure it is native, but it spreads very quickly. So it's very hard to hand pull out. So if you have a lot of it and you'd want to get rid of it, you'd want to use herbicides instead, because it's also one of the rhizomatous plants where it spreads mainly through its roots. So there's no like seed head to get rid of. So
So basically just some herbicide is that would probably tell it is the only possible solution to get rid of it.
it's the easiest solution because you can take all that time pulling it out. And then if you plant native plants where it is or other more beneficial ground covers, that should be able to take over. And
Can you burn? If like you pull up a bunch of poison like this, and there was any burn it?
I don't think you shouldn't burn it, I don't think, because of the sap, and it's not recommended. But I'm not too sure. Yeah,
Maybe.
so it's not recommended that you burn it. Yes.
A few years ago, I called the extension, the ag line,
Mhm.
asking what she'd like me to put out at the county fair. And she said, oh my gosh, wild parsnip. So she sent them down to the office. And the number one problem
Mhm.
was it kills horses. It's
Yes.
so toxic to horses. And it began in southern Minnesota because they found it by my dad's lake house on the bike trail.
Mhm.
And the bikers go all over the state
Oh, yeah.
and the seeds stuck in tires. And they load their bikes up, but come here, go there.
Yeah.
And it spread like crazy, but she was very, very concerned about horses
Mhm.
and mules. And I still put things out for information about that because it's so toxic to the animals.
Yeah. Poison hemlock is extremely toxic to all animals.
Of course.
Or wild parsnip is too, yes. Especially because the animals will eat it while it is poisonous to us, but we know not to eat it. And a lot of people don't just go out in their yards and eat things. But yeah, people taking seeds along with them is a huge problem for the spread of invasive species. Getting it on your bike if you're biking somewhere with it, getting it on your shoes or boots if you go into a forest or anywhere with it. And especially with non-terrestrial invasives, which this is on, but with aquatic ones. If you have it on your boat, or even if your pet goes into the water, it can get a bunch of seeds from invasive aquatic plants on it. So you have to be very careful with everything and make sure you have everything cleaned off when you go from one place to another.
There's a couple questions in the chat. What is the difference between herbicide spray and foliar spray?
Herbicide spray and foliar spray. So herbicide spray is the bigger category. So that would include all herbicides, while foliar spray focuses on the foliage and is used to take out the leaves on a plant and other things like that so that they can't grow anymore.
And then you maybe covered this, but is creeping Charlie considered invasive?
Yes, but Creeping Charlie is not considered invasive or prohibited one by the state of Minnesota. But you can still remove it from your yard. And it is, especially in gardens, it can become a nuisance and is a weed.
Does
Yes.
the DNR have any picturing of dogs from some of these?
Oh, yes.
I identify them and you see them in a different stage or
Mhm.
another day or you don't like the day, is that enough to one or not?
Oh, yes, they have a lot of resources for that. There's a helpful one that has the differences between some of the toxic plants and similar ones that aren't. They have a lot of photos on their website of all these different plants. I sourced the photos for this presentation from their website. So if you go to their website, and they have a whole list of all the invasive species to Minnesota with photos. And then I also have a little booklet from the DNR that's like a pocket guide to invasive species. Yes, it's very helpful, especially in the field. Yes, our office one, we just have one in our office, so I'm not sure when they got it, but that would be a good resource to have. I think it's a good resource to have. I use it all the time.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you, Nigel.
You're welcome. All right.
And
yeah.
we kind of shifted our schedule around next week or next month, the second Tuesday. I believe we're gonna be having Julie Weisenhorn from the state office, zooming in to talk about a subject. And then Tuesday or December will be, Indigenous gardening practices with Kayla Schubert. So,
Thank you all for coming.
all right,
Thank
thanks.
you. Yep.
All right. Pass this down. Thank you.